Karen tried to steal my professional camera at a high school football game. I work as a freelance sports photographer and specialize in building recruitment portfolios for high school athletes. Parents pay me a premium to stand on the sidelines and capture high-resolution action shots of their kids to send to college scouts. It's a niche market, but in wealthy suburban districts where college football scholarships are treated like lottery tickets, it pays well. The job requires an insane amount of expensive gear. You can't shoot a high school football game under terrible stadium lights with a standard kit lens. My primary setup is a flagship mirrorless camera body attached to a massive 400mm telephoto f2.8 lens that costs more than a decent used car. It weighs about 8 pounds, sits on a thick carbon fiber monopod, and the front glass element is the size of a dinner plate. Last Friday evening, I was hired by a father to photograph his son, the starting running back for a wealthy suburban high school. The dad had paid my full day rate up front. His kid was a junior, already getting looks from Division II programs, and they needed perfectly crisp, tightly framed shots of him breaking tackles and finding gaps in the offensive line. I arrived an hour before kickoff to get the lay of the land. The air was crisp, hovering around 50 degrees, and the stadium smelled like artificial turf rubber and concession stand popcorn. I checked in with the athletic director at the field house, got my official neon green sideline media vest, and wheeled my heavy Pelican hard case onto the track surrounding the turf field. The case was basically a rolling vault and secured with 2 heavy-duty combination padlocks. Everything was completely normal. The stands filled up, the marching band played the national anthem, and the game kicked off. Until the middle of the first quarter, it was a smooth shoot. The lighting on the home side was surprisingly even. I was kneeling on the 30-yard line, tracking my client's son through the viewfinder as he took a handoff and bounced it to the outside. My finger was holding down the back button focus, waiting for the exact moment he stiff-armed a defender. Then I felt a sharp tap on my shoulder. It wasn't a gentle brush. It was a hard, aggressive poke. I pulled my eye away from the rubber eye cup, losing the shot completely, and looked up. A woman in her late 40s wearing a custom bedazzled Booster Club sweatshirt and a black visor was glaring down at me. She had a thick plastic clipboard pressed tightly against her chest and looked like she was ready to issue me a parking citation. She smelled heavily of vanilla perfume and peppermint gum. She didn't introduce herself. She just pointed a manicured finger directly at my camera lens and told me she needed me to start taking more photos of the defensive line because her son played linebacker and I was ignoring him. I stood up slowly, keeping one hand securely on my camera grip. I politely smiled, using my standard customer service voice, and explained that I was a private contractor. I told her I was hired by a specific family, not the school district, and definitely not the Booster Club, so I was only focusing on one player tonight. It's a common misconception. People see the big lens and assume I work for the local paper or the yearbook. Usually, a quick explanation clears it up. She scoffed loudly, a harsh, dismissive sound that caught the attention of a nearby ball boy. She crossed her arms over her clipboard and told me that was entirely unacceptable. She introduced herself as Brenda, the president of the Athletic Booster Club. She stated this title as if she had just told me she was the mayor of the city. She then informed me that anyone standing on her sideline was required to submit all their photos to the team's official Facebook page by midnight, completely unwatermarked. I adjusted my monopod. I told her again, keeping my voice flat and professional, that my photos were the private property of my client who paid for my time. I would not be giving her anything, not let alone free content for a Facebook page. Brenda's face turned completely red. The veins in her neck pressed against the collar of her sparkly sweatshirt. She demanded to know who hired me. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, claiming it was against district policy for parents to hire outside media without her personal written approval. I knew for a fact this was a lie. I had cleared my presence with the athletic director an hour ago. I decided the conversation was over. I ignored her, turned my body away, and brought my camera back up to my eye because the referee was blowing the whistle and the offense was breaking the huddle. Then she did it. She actually reached down and grabbed the padded nylon strap of my camera, yanking it downward. The heavy rig jerked forward, the monopod digging into the turf. If I hadn't had my right hand firmly wrapped around the battery grip, she would have pulled a $12,000 piece of equipment straight into the dirt. I immediately stood up, squared my shoulders to her, and slapped her hand away from my gear. It wasn't a gentle brush off. It was a firm, defensive strike to her wrist to break her grip. Do not ever touch my equipment, I told her. My voice wasn't loud, but it was dead serious. She gasped dramatically, her mouth falling open in a perfect O. She took 3 stumbling steps backward, clutching her wrist against her chest as if I had just snapped her forearm in half. She started yelling that I had assaulted her. She yelled it toward the home bench, trying to draw an audience. A nearby assistant coach holding a laminated play sheet looked over. I made eye contact with him. He took one look at Brenda, rolled his eyes, and quickly looked away. Clearly, he realized it was just Brenda throwing one of her usual tantrums. She pointed her finger directly in my face, her voice shaking with manufactured rage, and told me she was going to have the principal escort me off the premises immediately. She spun around and stormed off toward the crowded grandstands, her boots clicking loudly against the aluminum track. I honestly thought that was the end of it. Overbearing booster parents are a hazard of the job, but usually they just complain to the school administration. The administration tells them to back off, and nothing happens. I checked my lens mount to make sure she hadn't damaged the connection, took a deep breath to slow my heart rate, and went back to shooting the game. I got some incredible footage in the second quarter. My client scored 2 touchdowns, and I nailed a sequence of him diving over the pylon that was going to look spectacular in his portfolio. Then halftime arrived. The players jogged into the locker room. The marching band came out onto the field, dragging out xylophones and massive brass instruments. The sidelines emptied out, leaving mostly just band parents and a few cheerleaders. I walked over to the bench by the 30-yard line where I had chained my Pelican case to the chain link fence. This is a standard security measure. A loaded case can weigh 50 pounds, but it has wheels, and someone can walk away with it if you aren't paying attention. I unlocked one of the padlocks, flipped the thick latches open, and set my primary camera down inside the custom-cut padded foam. And I needed to swap out the main battery and switch out my memory cards before the third quarter. While the case was open, I also pulled out my secondary camera. It's a smaller but still incredibly expensive setup. A full-frame mirrorless body with a 24 to 70mm f2.8 wide-angle lens. The whole rig is worth about $4,000. I brought it out specifically to take some wide environmental shots of the stadium under the lights, maybe catch the band forming their shapes on the field to give my client some atmospheric B-roll for his video reel. I closed the lid of the Pelican case. I set the smaller camera on top of the closed hard plastic lid. I turned my back for exactly 5 seconds. I reached into the front pocket of my backpack, which was resting on the bench, to grab my insulated water bottle. I unzipped the pocket, pulled the bottle out, took a quick drink, and turned back around to grab my wide-angle camera. The top of the Pelican case was completely empty. I panicked panicked for a split second. My brain went to the most logical, least catastrophic explanation. I thought the camera strap had slid off the slick plastic and the camera had fallen into the tall stadium grass around the bench. I looked down. Nothing. I looked under the bench. Nothing. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. Then I looked up. About 60 yards away, moving fast, was Brenda. She was power walking down the running track toward the north parking lot gates. She wasn't looking back. She was walking with the stiff, unnatural posture of someone trying very hard to act normal while doing something incredibly illegal. But my $4,000 camera was clutched tightly against her chest, partially hidden beneath her clipboard. She was literally trying to steal my equipment. I didn't scream. I didn't shout, "Stop thief," or chase her down the track like a maniac. If I chased her, she would run, and if she ran, she might drop the camera on the concrete. Electronics and concrete don't mix. My priority was getting my gear back intact. I calmly locked the latches on my Pelican case, snapped the padlock shut, grabbed my water bottle, and walked directly toward the home side concession stand. High school football games in this county always have a police presence. As I rounded the corner of the bleachers, the smell of burnt hot dogs and stale nacho cheese hit me, and right there, leaning against a white patrol car parked near the entrance, were two uniformed county police officers. They were holding paper cups of coffee, chatting, and watching the crowd line up for snacks. I walked straight up to them. I didn't waste time. I didn't sound panicked. I approached the older officer, a guy with graying hair and a heavy-duty belt, tapped the official media credential hanging around my neck, and pointed toward the north gate. "Officer," I said, "a woman just stole a piece of grand theft-level electronics from my staging area. She is currently walking out the north gates toward the parking lot." The older cop looked at my vest, looked at my completely serious face, and set his coffee cup down on the hood of the cruiser. The younger cop immediately tossed his cup into a nearby trash can. "Show us," the older cop said. We briskly walked toward the exit gates. We didn't run, but we moved with purpose, cutting through the sparse crowd of teenagers hanging out by the bathrooms. We cleared the fence line and stepped out into the massive, brightly lit asphalt parking lot. I scanned the rows of cars. "There," I pointed. We caught up to Brenda right as she was standing behind a pristine white Lexus SUV. She had her keys in one hand and was in the process of unlocking the power trunk. My camera strap was dangling from her arm, the heavy lens clacking against her metal clipboard. "Ma'am!" the older cop called out, his voice booming across the quiet parking lot. Brenda spun around. She saw the two uniformed police officers bearing down on her, and you could see the exact second her brain short-circuited. She froze, her eyes darting from the cops to the camera in her hand, and then to me, standing just behind the officer's shoulders. Instantly, she put on a sickly, sweet, incredibly distressed smile. It was the face of a suburban martyr. She rushed over to the officers, completely ignoring me, and held my camera out in front of her like it was a piece of contaminated evidence she had bravely secured. "Oh, thank goodness you're here, officers," she started frantically explaining, her voice pitching up an octave. "I am Brenda, the Booster Club president here. I just had to confiscate this camera from this man." She pointed a shaking finger right at me. "He is a creepy, unauthorized man who snuck onto our sidelines. He was taking illegal photos of teenage boys. I caught him, and when I told him to leave, he assaulted me. Then I was just bringing this to my car to lock it up before finding you to have him arrested for trespassing and assault." It was a phenomenal performance. If I hadn't been the one standing there, I almost would have believed her. The older cop looked at me. He looked at my official school-issued neon green media vest with the district logo printed on the back. He looked at the heavy laminated credential hanging around my neck that literally had the athletic director's signature on it. "Ma'am," the cop said, his tone perfectly neutral, "does this camera belong to the school?" "Yes," Brenda lied without missing a beat. "It belongs to the Booster Club. It was purchased with our fundraiser money for the yearbook. He stole it from our sideline table." The cop looked at the camera. It was a matte black, a magnesium alloy professional body with 0 school markings, no property tags, and a piece of gaffer tape over the logo, a common trick professionals use to make their gear look less flashy. "Okay," the cop said gently. He took a half step closer to her. "If it's the Booster Club's camera, can you do me a favor and turn it on?" Brenda blinked. She looked down at the camera in her hands as if it were an alien artifact. Professional mirrorless cameras do not look or function like point-and-shoots or smartphones. They are covered in custom function buttons, command dials, exposure compensation wheels, and joysticks. The power switch on this specific model wasn't a standard button. It was a stiff mechanical collar switch located on the left shoulder of the camera body, entirely separate from the shutter button. I don't use this specific one very often," she stammered. Her sickly sweet smile was starting to fracture. "The students usually operate it." She fumbled with the complex dials. She pressed the menu button. She pressed the playback button. She spun the mode dial. The rear LCD screen remained completely black. She clearly had absolutely no idea how to operate a professional mirrorless system. She couldn't even find the power switch. Her thumb kept mashing the autofocus joystick. I stepped forward, moving slowly so as not to startle the officers. "Officer," I asked quietly, "can I prove ownership without touching the device?" The older cop looked at Brenda's frantic, sweating face, then back at me. He nodded. "Go ahead." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened my camera manufacturer's proprietary mobile app, and because the camera was still technically powered on, it had merely gone to sleep to save battery when I set it down on the bench. Its Bluetooth receiver was still active. I tapped the Bluetooth connection button on my phone screen. A small loading circle spun for about 2 seconds. Device connected. The green indicator light on the back of the camera in Brenda's hands suddenly flashed to life. Brenda gasped and nearly dropped it. "Hold on to it, please," I said to her. Through the app on my phone, I had full remote control of the camera's functions. I navigated to the remote shooting menu. I made sure the drive mode was set to continuous high speed. I looked at Brenda, holding my phone up so the officer could see my thumb hovering over the digital shutter button on the screen. I tapped the command. Instantly, the camera's mechanical shutter started firing off rapidly. Clack, 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 clack. It was shooting at 20 frames per second. In the dead quiet of the empty parking lot, the machine gun sound of the heavy mechanical shutter echoing off the asphalt was deafening. Brenda shrieked. It was a genuine scream of terror. She literally threw her hands up, dropping the camera completely. I was already stepping forward. I caught the heavy nylon strap midair, inches before the lens slammed into the pavement. The camera swung safely against my leg, still firing away until I took my thumb off my phone screen. The silence that followed was heavy. I smoothly rotated the camera in my hands, finally switching the physical power collar to wake up the rear LCD screen. I pressed the menu button. I'd navigated to the deeply buried settings folder and clicked on Copyright Info. I turned the bright, glowing LCD screen toward the older officer. The digital copyright metadata, permanently programmed into the camera's internal software, information that attaches to the EXIF data of every single photo taken, displayed clearly on the screen. It listed my full legal name, the name of my LLC, my business phone number, and my home address in bright white letters against a black background. background. With my free hand, I pulled my wallet out of my back pocket. I slid my driver's license out and handed it to the cop so he could match the information. The officer looked at my plastic ID card. He looked at the glowing screen of the camera. He handed my license back to me. Then he turned to Brenda. Her arrogant, though entitled smile had completely vanished. Her face was the exact color of blackboard chalk. Her mouth was opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice dropping the polite customer service tone he had been using. It was now cold, authoritative, and sharp. Brenda started stuttering. Wait, there's a misunderstanding. I was just taking it to the main office for safekeeping because he shouldn't be here. I was just protecting the boys." The officer wasn't having any of it. He unclipped the leather pouch on the back of his duty belt and pulled out his steel handcuffs. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," he instructed her. "You are being detained for suspicion of felony grand theft." "What?" Brenda shrieked. I backing up until her spine hit the trunk of her white Lexus. No, you can't do this. I am the PTA president. I am the Booster Club president. My husband is a dentist. Do you know who we are?" The younger officer stepped in, grabbing her left arm firmly and pulling it behind her back. "Stop resisting, ma'am." She immediately started sobbing hysterically. Heavy, ugly tears ruined her makeup, streaking black mascara down her cheeks. The metal cuffs ratcheted shut around her wrists with a series of sharp mechanical clicks. But the absolute best part, the perfect cinematic timing of the entire evening, happened right at that moment. The muffled sound of drums started drifting from the stadium. The marching band had finished their halftime performance. They were exiting the field through the north gates, marching directly into the parking lot to load their instruments onto the waiting yellow school buses. About 50 high school teenagers in full uniform walked out from behind the chain-link fence. They stopped dead in their tracks. Leading the football players out for the second half was the home team, walking down the adjacent path. Right at the front of the pack, helmet under his arm, was her son, the linebacker. They all stood there under the glaring amber parking lot lights, completely silent, watching Brenda get pressed against the trunk of her own luxury SUV, sobbing uncontrollably while 2 county police officers searched her pockets. I didn't stick around to hear the rest of her excuses. I didn't need to give a statement right then. The officers already had my card and knew exactly where I would be. And I just slung my perfectly safe $4,000 camera over my shoulder. I gave the older officer a brief nod, turned around, and walked back up the paved path toward the bright lights of the turf field. The second half was just starting. The air was colder now, the stadium louder. I walked back to my locked Pelican case, swapped out my batteries, and checked my focus settings. I knelt back down on the 30-yard line, pulled my eye up to the viewfinder, and went back to work. I spent the entire second half taking incredibly sharp, high-resolution photos of Brenda's son missing 3 crucial tackles. The final whistle blew a little after 10 o'clock. The home team won by 14 points, mostly thanks to my client's son, who rushed for over 150 yards. I packed up my gear with methodical precision. Our lenses detached, caps snapped on, bodies nestled into their custom foam cutouts. The heavy, satisfying clack of the Pelican case latches felt better than usual. The atmosphere on the track was completely different now. The usual post-game chaotic energy, parents hugging players, coaches yelling final instructions, was muted. People were whispering. Groups of booster moms in their bedazzled apparel were huddled together in tight circles, casting nervous glances toward the parking lot, even though Brenda and her white Lexus were long gone. A few of the assistant coaches made eye contact with me as they walked past. None of them said a word, but a couple of them gave these subtle, tight-lipped nods. They had all dealt with Brenda for years. None of them were sad to see her go. I wheeled my case out to my truck, loaded everything in, and then drove home. I spent the next 4 hours at my computer, culling, cropping, and color correcting the raw files. I delivered a gallery of 85 tack-sharp, perfectly lit action shots to my client by 3 a.m. He paid the invoice online 10 minutes later and left a glowing review on my website. He didn't mention the parking lot incident. I didn't either. I thought that would be the end of the drama, but the legal system doesn't operate on a weekend schedule. Monday morning at 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was a local number I didn't recognize. I answered it, expecting a new client inquiry. Instead, it was a Detective Miller from the county police department. He sounded tired and asked if I could come down to the precinct to give a formal recorded statement regarding the attempted theft on Friday night. I grabbed a coffee and drove down to the station. It was a cinder block building that smelled like floor wax and old paper. Detective Miller sat me down in a small room and hit record on a digital dictaphone. I walked him through the entire timeline. The initial confrontation, her physical contact with my gear, her demand for my property, the 5-second window where the camera vanished, and the confrontation in the parking lot. I provided him with the serial numbers for the camera body and the lens, the original purchase receipts, and a screenshot of the Bluetooth remote firing sequence that caught her red-handed. She's sticking to her story, Detective Miller told me, leaning back in his squeaky desk chair. She's claiming she thought the camera belonged to the Booster Club, and she was securing it because she believed you were a trespasser. I was wearing a school-issued media vest, I reminded him, and my name is digitally programmed into the camera's internal motherboard. I know, Miller sighed. Her defense attorney knows it too, but her husband is throwing a lot of money at this. In this state, the theft of property valued over $2,000 is a third-degree felony. Your rig was $4,000. She's looking at potential jail time, not just a slap on the wrist. They are going to try and make this go away. I told him I was perfectly willing to testify. I shook his hand and left. The first attempt to make it go away happened 48 hours later, and I was at my desk editing a volleyball tournament when my business line rang. I answered. The man on the other end introduced himself as Dr. Richard Miller, no relation to the detective. Brenda's husband, the dentist. His tone was entirely different from his wife's. He didn't sound arrogant or entitled. He sounded deeply exhausted. I want to apologize for my wife's behavior, he started, his voice completely flat. She has been under a tremendous amount of stress with the Booster Club, and she had a severe lapse in judgment. She thought she was protecting the students. I didn't interrupt him. I just let him talk. I know the equipment is expensive, he continued, and I know she shouldn't have touched it. I'd like to offer you $5,000 to cover any potential damages or emotional distress, provided you contact the prosecutor's office and tell them you want to drop the charges. It was a blatant attempt to buy his way out of a felony. Dr. Miller, I said, keeping my voice as steady and professional as I had with his wife. My camera wasn't damaged because I caught it before she dropped it on the asphalt, and I don't have the power to drop the charges. The state of is pressing charges against your wife for grand theft. I'm just the victim and the primary witness. They will drop it if the victim refuses to cooperate, he pressed, a little edge of desperation creeping into his voice. $5,000, cash, today. I'm not interested, I said. Do not contact this number again. I hung up and immediately emailed the time, date, and exact nature of the phone call to Detective Miller. The fallout at the high school was swift and absolute. You cannot have the president of the Booster Club arrested for a felony in front of the varsity football team and the marching band without consequences. On Thursday of that that week, I received an email from the athletic director. It was a mass BCC email sent to all approved freelance media and local press. It was incredibly formal. It stated that effective immediately, Brenda was no longer associated with the athletic booster club. It also clarified that media personnel hired by private families were fully authorized to be on the sidelines, and that any interference with working professionals by parents or volunteers would result in an immediate ban from the stadium. A local parent whose son I had photographed the previous year sent me a text a few days later with the inside gossip. The school district hadn't just removed Brenda from her presidency. They had ordered a full independent audit of the booster club's finances. Apparently, her claim to the police that the booster club had purchased a camera triggered a massive red flag with the school board because there was no such purchase in their ledgers. Brenda was entirely radioactive. She wasn't even allowed to attend the games anymore. The legal process dragged on for months, as these things always do. It didn't go to trial. People like Brenda rarely let things go to trial where all their dirty laundry gets aired in public. In late March, right around the time I was gearing up for the spring track and field season, I got a final call from the prosecutor's office. They had reached a plea agreement. Brenda pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of misdemeanor theft and disorderly conduct. The felony was taken off the table, which meant she wouldn't see the inside of a prison cell. But the judge didn't let her walk away clean. She was sentenced to 200 hours of community service, heavily restricted from any school-related volunteer work. She was given 2 years of supervised probation. And most devastatingly for a woman whose entire social currency was built on controlling the high school athletic hierarchy, the judge issued a 3-year trespass warning. Brenda was legally barred from stepping foot on any property owned by the school district for 3 years. She couldn't go to the football games. She couldn't go to the booster club meetings. She couldn't even go to her son's graduation ceremony the following year. She had to sit in her expensive house, isolated from the community she had tried so hard to dominate, while the rest of the neighborhood moved on without her. Her son finished out his junior and senior seasons. I shot 3 more games at that stadium over the next year. He was a decent player, aggressive off the line, but he lacked the lateral quickness for a Division I program. He ended up committing to a small, private Division III school 2 states away. Every time I walked onto that turf field, wheeled my heavy Pelican case onto the track, and locked it to the chain link fence, I was left completely alone. The new booster club president, a quiet guy who ran a local hardware store, always gave me a polite wave and offered me a free bottle of water from the concession stand. Nobody ever asked me to shoot photos for the team Facebook page again. Nobody asked to see my credentials, and absolutely nobody ever touched my gear. I thought Brenda was completely in the rearview mirror. The system had worked, the school had protected its boundaries, and I was back to doing my job. But wealthy, angry people who have lost their social standing don't just move on. They fester. They sit in their big houses, isolated from their former friends, and they obsess over the person they blame for their downfall. And exactly 2 years and 11 months after the incident in the parking lot, just 4 weeks before the state's statute of limitations for personal injury claims was set to expire, I was sitting in my home office editing a batch of lacrosse photos. Someone knocked on my front door. I opened it to find a guy in a faded gray polo shirt holding a thick manila envelope. He asked if I was the registered agent for my photography LLC. I said yes. He handed me the envelope, said, "You've been served," and walked back to his idling Honda Civic. I went back inside, broke the seal, and pulled out a 50-page civil summons. Brenda was suing me, both personally and corporately, for $75,000. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of vindictive fiction. She wasn't suing me for the camera incident, and because she had already pleaded guilty to the theft. You can't sue someone for stopping you from committing a crime. Instead, her high-priced civil attorney had constructed a narrative around the moment I stopped her from pulling my gear to the ground. According to the filing, when I violently struck her hand away from my camera strap on the sidelines, I caused severe permanent soft tissue and nerve damage to her right wrist. She claimed this injury required months of specialized physical therapy, ruined her ability to play tennis at her country club, and caused chronic daily pain. The suit also included a claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress, arguing that my aggressive behavior on the sideline was the direct catalyst for her panic attack in the parking lot, which led to her unjust public humiliation. Not it was a classic slap suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's a legal bullying tactic. The goal wasn't necessarily to win. The goal was to drain my bank account in legal fees, stress me out, and punish me for not dropping the criminal charges 3 years prior. Dr. Miller's $5,000 settlement offer had been rejected, so they were going to spend $20,000 on a lawyer just to make my life miserable. I didn't panic. I run a legitimate business. Part of running a legitimate business means paying for a robust general liability and professional indemnity insurance policy. I scanned the documents and emailed them directly to my insurance broker. Within 24 hours, the insurance company assigned me a defense attorney named Marcus. Marcus was a heavy-set, tired-looking guy in his late 50s who worked for a firm that specialized entirely in defending small businesses against frivolous personal injury claims. We had our first meeting over Zoom. I walked him through the reality of that night. I told him about the firm, defensive swipe to break her grip on my $12,000 rig. Marcus didn't even blink. He took a sip of his coffee and shook his head. "It's a spite suit," Marcus said, his voice gravelly. "She knows you didn't permanently injure her. Her lawyer knows you didn't permanently injure her. They're banking on your insurance company offering a nuisance settlement, maybe 10 or 15 grand, just to avoid the cost of going to court. That way she gets a check, she gets to feel like she won, and her husband gets to tell his golf buddies they sued you and settled. I don't want to settle," I told him. "If you pay her, it validates her delusion." "My thoughts exactly," Marcus smiled. "Your policy gives us the right to litigate this aggressively. We aren't offering them a dime. Let's make them prove it." Thus began the agonizingly slow, grinding machinery of civil discovery. For the next 6 months, I had to compile every single email, text message, and invoice related to that specific football game. Marcus sent a massive wave of discovery requests back at Brenda's lawyer. If she was claiming severe medical injuries, we had the legal right to see every single medical record, physical therapy receipt, and doctor's note from the date of the incident to the present day. And we also subpoenaed her country club for her tennis court reservation records to see if her game was actually ruined. They dragged their feet, they filed extensions, they objected to our requests. It was a war of administrative attrition. Finally, the judge forced their hand. They had to produce the medical records. Marcus called me the day the file arrived at his office. He sounded like he was trying very hard not to laugh. "So," Marcus said over the phone, "she did go to a doctor for her wrist. She went the Monday after the football game." "And?" I asked. "And the doctor took an x-ray, found absolutely nothing wrong, diagnosed it as a mild contusion, and told her to take ibuprofen. She never went to physical therapy. She never saw a specialist. And according to the records from the country club, she played in a mixed mixed doubles tournament 3 weeks later and took second place. The entire foundation of her $75,000 lawsuit was a complete fabrication. But in the civil system, catching someone in a lie on paper isn't the end. You have to trap them under oath. In November, we finally moved to depositions. We met in a sterile, windowless conference room at a court reporting agency downtown. The room smelled like stale carpet and ozone from the copy machines. I sat on one side of the long mahogany table next to Marcus. A court reporter sat at the head of the table, fingers hovering over her stenograph machine. The heavy wooden door opened and Brenda walked in. I hadn't seen her since she was pressed against the trunk of her white Lexus in handcuffs. She looked older, and the bedazzled Booster Club energy was completely gone. She was wearing a very conservative, expensive beige pantsuit. Her husband, Dr. Miller, walked in behind her, looking just as exhausted as he had sounded on the phone 3 years ago. Her attorney, a slick guy in a tailored suit who looked like he billed by the minute, sat down next to her. Brenda didn't look at me once. She kept her eyes locked on the legal pads in front of her. She was sworn in. Marcus began his questioning. He started slow, establishing the timeline, her role in the Booster Club, and her general health before the incident. Brenda answered in short, clipped sentences. Her lawyer objected to almost everything, mostly just to disrupt Marcus's rhythm, but Marcus ignored him and pushed forward. Then Marcus pivoted to the night of the game. Mrs. Miller, Marcus said, looking down at his notes. You claim my client violently struck your right arm, causing severe and lasting nerve damage to your wrist. Is that correct? Yes, Brenda said. He hit me very hard. It was completely unprovoked. And the pain was immediate? Excruciating. She lied smoothly. And this injury severely limited the use of your right hand in the hours and days following the assault? Yes, I could barely use it. Marcus nodded slowly. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a sleek silver laptop. He opened it, turned the screen to face Brenda and her attorney, and tapped the spacebar. It wasn't a document. It was a video. During the criminal investigation 3 years ago, and Detective Miller had subpoenaed the high school's security camera footage to trace Brenda's path from the sidelines to the parking lot. Marcus had obtained the police file during discovery. The video on the screen was from a wide-angle security camera mounted above the concession stand, pointing down toward the exit gates. It was grainy, black and white night vision, but it was clear enough. It showed Brenda walking briskly away from the field, and it clearly showed what was in her hands. My $4,000 backup camera rig weighs about 4 pounds. The lens is bulky glass and metal. In the video, Brenda was holding the heavy camera entirely with her right hand. Her severely damaged, painfully injured right hand. She wasn't cradling it. She was gripping the metal lens barrel tightly and holding it securely against her chest while she power walked across the asphalt. Marcus let the video loop twice in complete silence. The only sound in the room was the clicking of the court reporter's keys. Brenda's face lost all its color. It was the exact same shade of chalk white I had seen in the parking lot. Dr. Miller closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. Mrs. Miller, Marcus said gently, breaking the silence. This video was taken approximately 45 minutes after you claim my client violently disabled your right wrist. Can you explain to me how you were able to comfortably carry a 4-pound piece of stolen metal and glass, using only the hand you claim was in excruciating pain? Her slick lawyer immediately threw his hand up. Objection, badgering the witness. And the characterization of the item as stolen is prejudicial. She pleaded guilty to the theft, counselor. Marcus fired back without looking at him. It's a matter of public record. Answer the question, Mrs. Miller. Brenda stared at the frozen frame of herself on the screen. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked at her lawyer, panic setting in. We need to take a break, her lawyer said quickly, slamming his legal pad shut. 5 minutes. They practically ran out of the room. Marcus leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and smiled at me. They aren't coming back. He was right. They stayed out in the hallway for 20 minutes. When the door finally opened, only her attorney walked back in. Brenda and Dr. Miller had taken the elevator straight down to the parking garage. Her attorney didn't sit down. He remained standing, looking incredibly annoyed, mostly at his own clients. My clients have authorized me to dismiss the lawsuit, he said tersely. With prejudice, Marcus countered instantly, meaning she could never, ever file a lawsuit regarding this incident again. With prejudice, the attorney agreed. He packed up his briefcase and left. The paperwork was signed the next morning. The lawsuit vanished. It cost my insurance company a few $1,000s in defense fees, but it cost me absolutely nothing except time. I never heard from Brenda again. Her son graduated, her husband's dental practice eventually rebranded under a different corporate umbrella, and they moved out of the district entirely. I still shoot high school football. I still wheel my heavy Pelican case out onto the track, and the gear is newer now. I upgraded to a 50-megapixel body last year, but the job is exactly the same. Parents still pay a premium, the lights are still terrible, and the artificial turf still smells like rubber. And every time I kneel on the 30-yard line, completely focused through the viewfinder, and I hear footsteps approaching from behind, I don't flinch. I just keep my finger on the shutter, knowing exactly what my gear is worth and exactly what I'm willing to do to protect it. You'd think a dismissed lawsuit with prejudice would be the absolute definitive end of a saga. When the legal system slams the door that hard, most people take the hint and disappear into the woodwork. But I didn't account for the fact that time moves forward, and high school kids eventually become adults. 4 years passed. My business scaled up. I wasn't just shooting high school Friday night lights anymore. I was traveling across state lines, shooting college games for players trying to build portfolios for the transfer portal or European leagues. I upgraded my primary rig again, invested in better glass, and bumped my day rate up accordingly. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when I opened an email from a prospective client. The subject line just read, Senior Game Coverage Inquiry. I clicked it. I don't know if you remember me. The email started. My name is Tyler Miller. You shot a few of my games back at Redacted High School. I'm a senior linebacker at a Division III school in Pennsylvania now. My final game is in 3 weeks. It's senior day. I want to put together a professional portfolio to send to some coaching contacts for a graduate assistant position next year. I know you're the best. I also know my mother put you through absolute hell a few years ago. I haven't spoken to her much since I left for college, but I understand if you don't want to take this job. If you are open to it, I will pay your full travel rate up front. I stared at the screen for a long time. Tyler Miller, the linebacker. The kid who had to watch his mother get handcuffed against a Lexus because she couldn't handle not being the center of the universe. I didn't hold the sins of the mother against the son. The kid had never been anything but polite on the field, and he was the one who suffered the most from her public meltdown. He was offering my full premium rate plus mileage. Money is money, and a contract is a contract. I typed a reply. I remember you, Tyler. Send me the stadium address and the kickoff time. I'll send you the invoice. He paid it within 10 minutes. 3 weeks later, I loaded my truck and drove 4 hours northeast into Pennsylvania. It was a miserable, biting cold Saturday. The temperature was hovering around 35 degrees, and a thin, icy drizzle was falling from a flat gray sky. The Division III stadium was small and intimate. Just metal grandstands, a slightly worn turf field, and a brick press box. It smelled like wet wool, damp leaves, and deep heat muscle rub. I checked in at the media gate, got my pass, and wheeled my Pelican case down to the visiting team's side of the field. I purposely set up on the opposite sideline from the home stands. I wasn't trying to hide, but I also wasn't looking to poke a sleeping bear if I didn't have to. Pre-game warm-up started. Tyler looked entirely different. He had filled out, added about 20 pounds of muscle, and moved with the heavy, deliberate confidence of a senior defensive captain. I snapped on my rain covers, thick nylon sleeves that protect the camera bodies from the drizzle, and started getting some tight isolation shots of him running drills. Then, the public address announcer called for the senior day ceremonies. The parents of the senior players lined up on the home sideline to walk their sons onto the field for a commemorative photo. I tracked Tyler through my massive telephoto lens. Walking out of the tunnel, holding a clear plastic umbrella, was Brenda. She looked older, her face a little tighter, her posture rigid. Dr. Miller wasn't with her. She walked onto the field, stood next to Tyler, and smiled for the university photographer. Tyler looked stiff. He didn't put his arm around her. He just held his helmet, stared straight at the camera, and waited for the flash. As they turned to walk back to the sidelines, Brenda's eyes swept across the field. Even through the rain, even across 50 yards of synthetic turf, I saw the exact moment she spotted me. You can't exactly hide a 400mm lens sitting on a carbon fiber monopod. She stopped walking. Her eyes locked onto my face. I didn't look away. I didn't lower the camera. I just stared right back at her through the glass. She immediately turned to the university security guard standing near the 30-yard line. She pointed at me. She started talking fast, and her hands moving aggressively. The old instincts were kicking in. She was out of her home district. The 3-year trespass warning had expired anyway, and she clearly felt empowered to try and flex her non-existent authority in a new environment. The security guard, a college kid in a yellow windbreaker who looked incredibly cold and bored, listened to her, looked across the field at me and sighed. He pulled his radio out, said something into it, and started jogging the perimeter of the field toward my side. I didn't pack up. I just double-checked my exposure settings. The guard jogged up to me, out of breath. "Hey man," he said, wiping rain off his forehead. "You got a credential?" I silently tapped a heavy laminated pass hanging around my neck. It had the athletic director's signature on it. "Okay, cool," the guard said. "There's a lady over there claiming you're stalking her son. Says you have a history of harassment. Her son hired me," I said flatly. I pulled my phone out, opened my email, and showed the guard the paid invoice with Tyler Miller's name on it. The guard looked at the screen, rolled his eyes, and muttered something under his breath. Fucking senior day. Before the guard could radio back, heavy cleats crunched on the turf behind him. We both turned. It was Tyler. He had jogged all the way across the field in full pads. He didn't look at me. He looked directly past me, across the 50 yards of turf, locking eyes with his mother who was standing by the home bench, watching the interaction with a smug, expectant look on her face. Tyler didn't yell. He didn't cause a scene. He just raised his right arm, pointed a thick, tape-wrapped finger directly at his mother, and made a sharp sweeping motion toward the exit tunnel. The universal signal for leave. Brenda froze. Tyler kept his arm raised. He wasn't breaking eye contact. He was a 22-year-old man, a senior captain, drawing a hard, undeniable boundary in front of his entire team. The smug look on Brenda's face shattered. It wasn't replaced by anger or entitlement or even the fake panic she had used in the parking lot all those years ago. It was replaced by profound, devastating embarrassment. She realized right then and there that she had no power left. Not over the school, not over the legal system, and absolutely not over her own son. She lowered her clear plastic umbrella, turned around, and walked up the stairs of the grandstands. She didn't go to the alumni tent. She didn't sit with the other parents. She walked all the way to the top, out the exit gates, and disappeared into the rainy parking lot. She didn't even stay for kickoff. Tyler lowered his arm. He finally turned to me. Rain was dripping off his face mask. "I'm sorry about that," he said, his voice deep and completely steady. "It won't happen again. Don't worry about it," I told him. "You ready to play?" Tyler nodded. "Yeah, make sure you get the hit stick shots. I'm playing downhill today." He jogged back to his sideline. The referee blew the whistle, the ball was teed up, and the game began. It was a brutal, hard-fought game in the mud and freezing rain. Tyler played like a man possessed. He racked up 12 tackles, 2 sacks, and a forced fumble that sealed the win in the fourth quarter. I got every single frame of it. At the mud flying off his cleats, the vapor rising from his shoulders in the cold air, the sheer intensity in his eyes through the face mask. They were some of the best sports photographs I'd ever taken in my career. I packed up my wet gear, loaded my truck, and drove the 4 hours home in the dark. I edited the gallery on Sunday and sent it to Tyler. He replied with a bonus payment that was completely unnecessary, along with a note that just said, "Thank you for sticking around." A year later, I saw his name on a press release. He had been hired as a defensive quality control coach for a Division I program in the Midwest. The headshot attached to the press article was one of the tight, atmospheric portraits I had taken of him on the sideline during that rainy game in Pennsylvania. I never saw Brenda again. I don't know if she ever learned her lesson, or if she just found a new neighborhood association or country club to terrorize. But it didn't matter. The camera she tried to steal was eventually retired and sits on a shelf in my office as a backup body. The business keeps growing. The sidelines are chaotic. The weather is unpredictable, and people will always try to cross boundaries they have no right crossing. But as long as my batteries are charged and my lenses are clean, I just keep my head down, frame the shot, and let the shutter do the talking.